We are back.
Hey everybody, it's been a while. I'm still having trouble with Facebook, even a month later. What are the odds, Greg? What are the odds? Welcome everybody. It's once again time for live bird identification. I am Nate Swick. I'm joined here by my ABA colleague Greg Neise, and we have been gone for a while. It's been a
It's been a
lot of
month.
scheduling issues, a lot of people out of town, a lot of stuff like that, and a lot of baby birds, frankly, that we didn't want to identify. So, but we're back now as bird migration starts to kick in, and we're going to talk bird. We're excited to be here with you. If you are new, welcome. If you've been here before, then you know the drill. But I'll explain it anyway. What we do here at the
Yeah.
ABA is that we host a few Facebook groups. Still people are on Facebook. We host some groups, one of which is called "What's This Bird?" It's a bird identification community, crowdsourced bird identification. What folks can do is they take photos of birds that they have seen out in the field birding or at their yards or wherever. They take photos of them, they post them there, and we identify them. Every once in a while, we get some birds that we want to talk about a little bit more in a little bit more detail. And that's what this What's This Bird Live is for. What we do is we pull some photos that we've seen recently in the What's This Bird group, and we are going to talk about them with you right here today while we vamp
But
for
not yet.
people to arrive. Not yet. Yeah, we got some stuff to do here. Greg, it's been a hot, wet summer here in the southeast.
It has been
I
a
don't know what
hot,
it's
wet
like
summer here
up
too.
in the Great Lakes.
It's
Those
been a hot, wet
things have
summer here
been.
too. One of the wettest, the heaviest rainfall I've ever seen outside the tropics happened this summer in Chicago. We got
Interesting.
we got 8.5 inches of rain at my house in 10 hours, which
Wow, that's a lot of rain.
it was insane. Um,
Yeah.
but on the in the bird news, man, the birds this summer have been
It's been
really
an
fun.
interesting summer for birds. That's
Yeah,
for
and the
sure.
you know the hot limpkin summer just keeps coming. And I mean, right now there's probably 5 or 6 limpkins in Illinois, and today
Yeah,
there were
yeah.
two together on the Wisconsin border, like just hanging out on a stump in a marsh. And
That's what they
it's
do.
like next year they're going to be breeding.
Yeah. Oh, probably. If not next year, then the year after for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. In Ontario, they've had a similar situation. I think they got their very first Limpkin record earlier this summer, and in quick succession, they've had second, third, and fourth. Boom, boom,
Yep.
boom. Like in the last 3 weeks. So that's the way those are. It's a hot Limpkin explosion.
It
Explosion of
is.
Limpkins
And
all
we've
over.
also,
That's the collective term for Limpkins now is explosion.
and I don't
Explosion
know
of
if it's
Limpkins all over the central of the continent.
I don't know if it's happening over in your neck of the woods, but spoonbills are on the move too. We have somewhere
Yeah. Huh.
between 1 and 3 or 4 spoonbills in the state at the moment. It's hard to tell because they're not in the same place on the same day. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We haven't seen a lot of that. It hasn't been a big spoonbill year. We had a big spoonbill year about 3 summers ago here in the southeast, and it has not been huge. I know they had a couple of them up in DC a couple weeks ago, and that was pretty notable. Usually that doesn't happen unless there's a bunch of them across the Virginias or the
well,
Carolinas. But
the
we haven't
most
had any.
the most notable spoonbill was in Wisconsin a few weeks ago, which was the first one in 100 years or more. And
Yeah,
that one showed up
yeah.
near Green Bay, and was thought to be lost, but was rediscovered, and a lot of people got to see that. So one other thing we do here is we talk to you. So if you're on Twitter, if you're on YouTube, or if you're on Facebook, if you have something you want to say, you have a question, just want to talk birds with us, let us know in the comments. We're watching those,
Please
and we
do,
will
please do.
respond as best we can. Want to
Yeah,
say hi
we
to.
had a yeah. I'm sorry. Make your
Uh,
highs. Do your highs. Then
I
we'll
want to say
discuss.
hi to Mia McPherson, Len Kopka, and
Hey,
Rosemary
Mia.
Meredith, all here in Facebook. And Susan Nelson said they had a documented spoonbill near Wolf River in Fayette County, Tennessee. Uh, Maybe the first record in this for that county. Yeah, it's. I'll bet that's just going to
Interesting.
continue through the month of August.
Yeah, she notes 50 miles east of Memphis. That would suggest that the spoonbills are moving up the Mississippi River and into the Ohio River, which seems to be the case. I think a lot of the limpkins are doing that too, because the Southeast has been pretty light on limpkins and spoonbills. We had one
Mhm.
limpkin earlier this year in North Carolina, and they're breeding in South Carolina now, so maybe that doesn't count. But we're missing a lot of that stuff. In usual years, we get it, but if they're coming up the Mississippi Valley, there's a mountain range in the way that's kind of preventing them from coming over. But that's just
Yeah.
speculation on my part. I don't really know. We've got some hellos to make on YouTube as well. Tim Panini, Anne, leading a bird walk tomorrow. Need to get in the bird mode again. Happy to help you do that. Anne asks, when will the Limpkins reach Western Washington? 5 years, 6 years, 7.
Next week. I mean, there's one in
They're having
Colorado.
yeah, right.
There's one in
They're having a hard
Colorado and
time.
one in Oklahoma right now.
Two in Colorado, actually.
Or two in
There's
Colorado.
there's a there's I think they're having trouble getting across the Western Great Plains, which is famously very dry, which makes sense. But
Yeah.
I bet if they get into the Rio Grande Valley, not the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas, but the Rio Grande River Valley that goes up into New
Right.
Mexico and up into Colorado. It's game over. They're going to be up, but they're going to be all over the place in no time. They think they're really following those big rivers, and if they get over to a big river in the west, then you're going to be having them in California before too long.
Yeah.
San Diego, summer 2025. Put it down. Mark it.
Yeah, and I think at least here, we've got these big invasive snails. Not
Yeah,
the
that's
ones
what
that
they're doing.
not the ones they normally eat, which I believe are called apple snails. We've got these.
It's invasive apple snail.
Those are the native. I think those are the native ones. I wasn't prepared for this particular question here, but the mystery snails that you get at the pet shop, or at least you used to be able to get at the pet shop, those have become naturalized, and they're just plowing through those around here. But they're also eating bivalves.
Yeah, mussels, invasive mussels, invasive. That's the story here. There's a ton
Yeah.
of invasive mussels in the southeast, in the Mississippi River too, and I think they show no prejudice against going after those as well. That seems to be what they really like. Also, when they get out of the snail territory, they're
Yeah,
a
so
mollusk eating machine.
they are. Also want to say hi to Rosemary Meredith and Dean Christopher here on Facebook. And
Jim Neitzel, Carolyn Jones, Christy Esmahan, hello on YouTube. I don't feel like I don't want to make those a competition, Greg. I'm watching the YouTube, you're watching the Facebook, but if you guys want to make it a competition, you're more than welcome to. Who's going to ask us the most interesting
Absolutely.
question this session? Who knows?
Where's the best
Manitoba,
one?
Jimbo C from Manitoba. Manitoba.
So, like Nate said, what we do here is we pull photos off of the "What's This Bird" group in Facebook that we think are interesting and worth talking about, and then we pull them up, and looks like we're going into 10 minutes of us just yakking. So maybe we ought to.
I think
do
that's
that.
enough. We've got a good crowd here on both of our streaming platforms. So we can move on to the meat. Enough hors d'oeuvres.
Well, we have a little bit of an hors d'oeuvre before we get going.
An amuse bouche.
An amuse bouche. Thank you very much for that. So, let's see here. There we go. The first thing that I would like to talk about is a really kind of a unique but really great article that is currently up at the ABA website. That's aba.org, and it concerns the European sandwich tern in North America. Now, sandwich tern is a bird that's known to most of us in the East. It's a saltwater species that's found from... What's that?
I'm sorry, it was not a say. So Mia McPherson said she liked my T-shirt, so I was showing my T-shirt. This is one of our old ABA Bird of the Year.
Oh
shirts.
yeah, the burrowing owl shirt.
It is not a sandwich tern.
No, it is not. However, the bird in the picture there is a sandwich tern. That was actually photographed in Chicago, and sandwich tern is a saltwater species that's found from South Texas up the Atlantic coast, around Florida up to what, summering up to what, Massachusetts, I think. Nate, does that sound about right?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, but that would not surprise me to see that they go up there.
Something
They're
like
really
that.
common here in the southeast.
So, when this bird showed up in Illinois in 2010, um, past ABA president Larry Balch and I were looking at this bird, and we noticed the hook shaped tips on the primary feathers, on the individual primary feathers, and that started some investigation that involved Martin Garner in the UK, who wrote a paper about this for Dutch Birding, and then got to his challenge series field guide, where it was determined that that primary pattern, along with everything else, but that primary pattern was key to identifying European sandwich tern. Okay, so we figured that out. Now, along comes David Sibley, and as David Sibley always does, he takes that and does a fantastic job of investigation and illustration. And so this article has 20, 30 illustrations of how to identify European sandwich tern. And a lot of people now are kind of rolling their eyes and like, oh my gosh, really? You're talking about this European subspecies that nobody's gonna see?
The weeds, Greg.
Well, here comes the kicker. Here comes the kicker. One of the most interesting parts about this is that in Sibley's investigation of all of the extraliminal records of sandwich tern, so all of those away from their normal breeding and wintering areas and normal summer areas in the ABA area, most of those have turned out to be European. So there wasn't just the one in Chicago and the one in Newfoundland. There's Colorado and Ohio and several from the Maritimes. And it turns out that if you see a sandwich tern away from its established range, as far as the guidebooks say the range, there's a really good chance it's a European. And at some point, I feel, and so does he in the near future, these species are going to be split. So a whole lot of people are going to get a Code 5 armchair tick.
Yeah. Yeah, so perhaps people aren't aware of the fact that sandwich refers to the area in England where the first bird was described. It refers to the European subspecies, which in the North American one would get a new name.
Acuiflavida.
It's typically called Acuiflavida. It's colloquially called Cabot's tern, after Jean Cabot, who I don't know if he even came to North America, but anyway, it doesn't matter. We would get a new species here on the ABA checklist, which is kind of exciting.
Yeah, and the story about how this all went down and all the investigation, everything that went into it is just fascinating. And so this is an in-depth article for ABA members. If you're an ABA member, go check it out. Just go to aba.org. It's on the homepage. You can't miss it. Okay. First bird comes to us from Connecticut.
What is the timing on this bird? Is this taken recently?
It's recent, I believe.
Okay. Well, some things to notice here. This is a very brightly patterned bird. A lot of stuff going on this thing. Little tiny bill. Hopping around on the ground. Don't usually see sparrows with a lot of orangey yellow on the front, so I think we can probably rule that one out. That bill does not look like a sparrow bill anyway. It looks more like kind of a warblery bill. The first glance I get this bird is a warbler, Greg.
I agree. And the size of the mulch behind its tail,
small bird,
would agree with the small size. It's kind of got a longish tail, and it's very heavily patterned. And as you said, it with the bright yellow and everything, it kind of rules out a lot of small birds, sparrows and vireos and all kinds of things. And the fact that this is migration and it's on the ground, you can't read too much into that. But there's two things that stand out besides the bright yellow color, and that's the wing bars and the kind of whitish, yellowish stripes on the back. And that's the key right there.
Yeah, for sure. This is fall warblers are, they get a bad rap. Peterson famously called them confusing fall warblers. And I think he was a little overstating the issue with them, but also, he was looking through poor quality binocular lenses, and they didn't have the technology that we have available to us now, so they were a little more confusing. But warblers
Yeah,
in general in the fall are pretty much just washed out versions of the birds we see in the spring. And there's
agreed.
one warbler that shows most of the species, I should say. There are a few exceptions, but most of the species show the same sort of patterns that you see in the spring, but the colors typically aren't as vibrant. But even so, this is a pretty vibrant bird. A
Yeah.
lot of bright yellow going on here, and the bird that has all that yellow on the face, on the breast. There's a couple birds that would probably be worth checking out here, worth working through. Yellow-throated warbler would be one, has a black and white pattern on the face and on the back, and
Hmm.
also Blackburnian warbler.
Yeah. So the field mark that I kind of alluded to, the whitish yellowish stripes streaks on
Mm-hmm.
the back are referred to as braces, and that is a slam dunk field mark for Blackburnian warbler
Indeed.
in pretty much all plumages except juvenile,
Yeah.
which we
Which
never see
most
anyways.
people never get to see. It's a
Yeah, I mean,
boreal bird. They've
you've
molted
got
out
to
of it by the
catch
time they
it.
start heading north.
Yeah, I think they
Maybe
lose that.
our watchers in Manitoba would get it, but that's about
Yeah,
it.
but even there, I mean,
Well,
they
I guess
lose
they
that.
come down to southern Appalachians. They breed in the high country.
But even so, even if you're where they live with warblers and juvenile plumage, they lose that plumage so quickly
Very
that
quickly.
even
Yeah.
if you live there, like that, you still don't see it very often.
Yeah. Keep that in mind because I think that's going to come up later in this slideshow as well. But yeah,
Yes.
Blackburnian warbler, one of the most brightly colored spring warblers for sure. But for my money, it does not get a lot less bright and beautiful in the fall. There's some really nice looking fall Blackburnian warblers out there. It's always a pleasant one to see. Connecticut, I'd imagine it's a breeding bird, not too far away. It might be spreading out a little bit depending on where in Connecticut you are. If it's in the highlands, then it's probably a breeding bird. If it's closer to the coast, it's probably a post-breeding wanderer. They wander short distances, and sometimes you see them in the late summer in places where they don't breed. But for the most part, that's a September October migrant for a lot of us here in the southeast.
So I just noticed on Facebook we have Amar Ayash, the gull
Hey,
whisperer,
Amar!
in the show here, and in the in
Not terns
watching
though.
us
Terns
here.
aren't his thing.
And if I'd known you were
Blackburnian
coming
warbler,
tomorrow,
Paula.
I would have thrown
Sorry,
some. I would have thrown some gulls in there. Yes, Paula Betts Baker. It is a Blackburnian warbler.
named after Anna
Um,
Blackburn, famed uh, English botanist. One of the few birds named after a woman.
yes. Len Kopka asked, "Would you say it's a female?" Not necessarily. In the fall, you really can't
Yeah.
tell. Um,
Females are usually even a little bit more dull than this one. They're kind of more of a creamy yellow than that kind of bright yellow. I would say this is like a young male or probably a younger male. First year, maybe second year.
yeah.
Um, it's not as pale as I think, but fall birds can be more variable in that sort of in that arena than spring birds for sure.
Yeah, and it's hard to. I mean, yeah, always with photographs like this, the photograph could be a little oversaturated.
Yeah.
There's always that stuff going on. But yes, this is a Blackburnian warbler identified by the pale braces on the back, in addition to everything else. But that's kind of the slam dunk mark that we can see. That usually this bird is in the treetops, and you have a really hard time seeing that field
That's
mark.
true. This is a
And it's
weird
only
angle.
when it
That's for sure.
only when it comes down like this, or at eye
Yeah.
level, or if it's hanging upside down, can you get a glimpse of the pale braces on the back.
It is interesting. I do tend to find, those kind of famously treetoppy warblers do tend to come down a lot more than they do in the fall than they do in the spring. I don't know
Absolutely.
whether it was whether they're finding more food down there, but things like black-throated green warbler, Blackburnian warbler, bay-breasted warbler, these birds that are very much associated as the tops of the trees in the spring. I typically see in shrubby meadows, goldenrod meadow,
Yeah, well,
goldenrod
we were
rich
talking
places.
about that last
Yeah,
fall,
those are the sort of
and
places we see them. Buggy places.
when the warblers are coming through, especially the later it gets in the year, so late September and
Mhm,
into October, when
for
the
sure.
mornings are cold and the insects kind of fall down
Yeah.
because they're cold. Um, the birds tend to hover around where the flowers are, and that's the goldenrods and the other weeds that grow on the woodland edges. And you will often find them if you find a nice woodlot or a park that's got some weedy scrub with goldenrods and other forbs that are blooming in the fall, asters. That's where you're going to find warblers.
Yep. That is a secret to fall birding right there. Doubly so if it's the morning before, or excuse me, the morning after a cold evening, and that's where the sunlight hits first. I mean, that is going to be just popping. So find that spot.
Absolutely. Okay, this comes from Flin Flon, Manitoba, and this is a
Is Flin
gorgeous
Flon a real
bird.
place?
Yeah.
That is fantastic. Love that.
This is a gorgeous bird, and another one that is in a plumage that really is very rarely seen outside of the breeding grounds, which in this case is the Arctic. But in Manitoba, it's close enough where this bird hasn't been worn. The plumage here is pretty much really pristine, nice. And it's such that it's confusing. But there are some things here that can identify this bird solidly for us.
Yeah, this is a great time of year to talk about shorebirds. This is kind of peak shorebird migration through, or at least the adult birds for much of the continent. You know, when shorebirds breed, they are up there in the very tippy top of the North America, where they've got 24 hours of daylight. And as soon as those adult birds finish breeding, they pretty much, book it out of there. Like they're gone, and they start heading south as soon as late July. And they leave the first year birds up there for a few more weeks, and then they start heading back and sort of peak. So there's two kind of distinct peaks of shorebird migration. The first one sort of late July, early August, and then another one sort of in another 3 weeks after that when the young birds are starting to come through.
And the first ones that come through, as Nate just said, are the adults, which are kind of in ragged plumage and kind of they're in transitional plumage, and the feathers are beat up, and sometimes it's so beat up that it can be hard to go by structure, although usually that's not the case. But they don't look like they do in the field guides because it's impossible to illustrate all the possible variations of wear. However, this bird is in the exact opposite situation. This bird is a young bird of the year in very sharp, pristine plumage. And the thing that stands out to me first is, all right, so it's obviously a small sandpiper, which we call peeps. And there's about...
Paludris genus.
Yeah, so there's about 10 of them, more or less. But there's only really
Laura
two.
Bird says, look at those feather edges. Yes. Oh, aren't those beautiful?
Oh, yeah.
Look at those things.
Those
those light-colored feather edges are among the first things to wear off in these birds. So when you've got a bird that has retained them, it is that's a cool-looking bird. Cool pattern.
Yeah. So I mean, looking at the bright rufous on the back and the black legs and everything, I would not be surprised if some people think, okay, Western sandpiper, but there's a whole lot going on that's not right for Western sandpiper. And number one is, look at how long those wings are.
Oh, they're so long. This is a very pointy bird.
This bird is
pointy on both ends.
It is pointy on both ends, and there are two sandpipers that are this shape, small, calidrous, with long wings like this, that are, relatively common in most of the ABA area.
And the central part.
Yes, particularly. And that is white-rumped and Baird's. And
it should be noted that they both have long wings because they are two of our longest distance migrants. The longer a bird's wings are, that's usually a good tell about how far that bird has to go in spring and fall. Short-winged birds typically don't migrate as far. They don't need them. It's much more efficient for a long-winged bird to fly. So these long-distance migrants typically evolve very, very long wings to help them do that as efficiently as possible.
And on Facebook, we have a suggestion of sanderling. Sanderling can be ruled out by the bird's right foot that we can see clearly. It has a hind toe called a hallux, and sanderling doesn't have a hind toe. So that rules that bird out on structure. But also, the sanderlings don't have really long wings like that, and they have heavier bills, and they tend to be more more heavily patterned, not as finely patterned as this. The pattern is kind of clunky, chunky. But so we're going to go to the comp here. And so here are the two species in play, and that is Baird's and white-rumped. And the bird in question is a juvenile white-rumped sandpiper. It is a very fresh, very clean juvenile white-rumped, and all that chestnut coloring up at the top, those fringes, that wears off really quick, and leaves the bird looking mostly gray, with long wings. Now you'll notice the Baird's that's in front of it has that very kind of black and white or black and buff scaly pattern that's very different.
Yeah, it's very distinctive. It's one of the most obvious things about a young Baird's sandpiper is that really cool scaly pattern that it has all over its back. Looks like
the overall
carp
color.
scales. Yeah, and it's buffy, especially on the breast. You can see on this white-rumped sandpiper that it looks a little bit more streaky. This one has a little bit of a wash across it, but it's kind of a grayish wash. That bright buff tan wash on that Baird sandpiper, you can see it really well in this comp. That is very distinctive. And actually the sort of fine streakings that you see on that Baird sandpiper will sort of wear off a little bit too. And so that what you'll get is the impression of this very scaly backed bird with this sort of buffy wash all across the front of it that is, makes Baird sandpiper one of the more distinctive migratory sandpipers this time of year.
Exactly. And one other thing that I want to point out, because this picture from Flin Flon is so wonderful.
All right, so I got an explanation of why it's called Flin Flon. This is from YouTube. Thank you, Jim.
I knew you were doing something.
Yeah, Flin Flon, named after a fictional character in The Sunless City from the papers and diaries of the late Josiah Flintabity Floniton. I couldn't tell whether he's joking or not. It's a true story, apparently. It's a little mining town. So there you go. Birding always produces.
Absolutely. Not the strangest town
always
name
delivers.
I've ever heard of, but
no, it's true. Great story.
The base of the bill. So if you look carefully at the base of this bird's bill, it's reddish. And if you're this close to a white-rumped sandpiper, and you can see that is a slam dunk mark for white-rumped sandpiper. What's that?
I'll give it to you. Yeah, absolutely. I've never been that close to a white-rumped sandpiper. I've always been like on the other side of a mud flat. White-rumped sandpiper.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where you really rarely can see it, but when you can,
you might as well point it out. This is a nice photo.
It's there. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Christy Esmondson asks, the line between the eye and the beak is also longer in the white-rumped. I guess that's the lore that she's talking about, like the face of the two birds gives it. I'm not sure. I think that's more of the foreshortened face of this Baird sandpiper in this comp. It's not something I necessarily would have noticed in the bird in the field, though I will say that Baird sandpiper does tend to have a plainer face than white-rumped. White-rumped tends to have a little more going on.
It does. It has less markings in the lores, and it also tends to have a steeper forehead and a more square pigeon-like head. It almost looks more like a buff-breasted sandpiper than the other calidrids. It tends to stand a little more upright.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But yeah, I think that there's a little bit of an optical illusion going on there with the amount of dark in the lore of the white rump versus the amount of dark feathering in the lore of the Bairds.
Yeah, fair enough.
And yes, and Paula Betts Baker says pectoral. No, it's not a pectoral. It's a white rump sandpiper.
No, pectoral does have pretty long wings.
Pectoral has long wings, and it also has red at the base of the bill. Oh. Pectoral is the other one that has red at the base of the bill, but it's a larger bird, and the juveniles
tend to be less colorful, less pattern.
Well, the juveniles can be very bright on the back, just like white-rumped. But again, it's a bigger bird with a lot more streaking on the chest.
Yeah, it's fatter,
and it's Alan Dellen Van Veen is watching from Guyana. Yep, welcome.
Yeah, hey, look at that.
Okay,
Yeah,
we're gonna.
talking more
Uh,
about just real briefly the difference between a pectoral and a white-rumped sandpiper. This was a thing that David Sibley pointed out on his blog many years ago that really stuck with me, and it's about how we talk about size versus proportion. And
mhm.
I think I brought it up in this space before, but I'll do it again. Pectoral sandpiper looks very small-headed. That's not because its head is actually very small. Its head is actually very similar in size to a white rump sandpiper, but the body of a pectoral sandpiper is very big and bulky and chunky, whereas
Yeah,
white rump sandpiper is kind of slender and svelte, and as we said early on, pointy. It feels very pointy, whereas pectoral sandpiper doesn't feel quite as pointy. Just despite having very long wings as well.
and pectoral sandpiper also has yellow legs.
Oh yeah, that's another one. That's probably the better field mark to go with. But sometimes they get muddy.
Oh yeah, no, hey, when pectoral sandpiper legs get
It's
muddy,
chesty, yeah.
they
As
can
Nora
they
Bird
can
says,
be
yep.
they can be confused for all kinds of things, from smaller peeps to rough to you name it.
Oh yeah, especially when there aren't other shorebirds around to compare them in size to. If you Pectoral sandpiper is funny in that it's the best identification for it sometimes is like the other birds around it, because it's in comparison with size to like a smaller peeps like western and semipalms or lease, which looks super tiny next to a pectoral, or a killdeer, which looks slightly larger than a pectoral. You kind of need other birds around sometimes. Otherwise, pectoral sandpiper is going to throw you, because sizes can be a very difficult thing to determine in the field.
Absolutely, absolutely. This comes
Oh,
to us from New Hampshire.
here we go. Let's do it. Let's get
Here
into
we
it.
go.
Yeah. Greg and I had a disagreement on this bird before we
No,
got
I
started.
don't think I don't think we're disagreeing. I don't think we're
bring it.
disagreeing,
We'll
but
bring it.
we have slightly different points of view on this one.
Yeah, should we put this in context? Identifying birds from photos can be extremely difficult because you frequently only get the one photo, and it's not always a very good photo. This is clearly like a back of the camera shot,
Yeah.
is what it looks like to me.
Yeah,
Which is makes things even more
it does.
difficult. Had either of us, Greg and I, seen this bird in the field, I guarantee that both of us would completely agree with its identification
No
without
problem.
any question whatsoever. But here we are trying to
Here we
parse the field marks of this
Patrick
half-hidden bird.
Patrick Bellardo on Facebook comments, "Oh, this one."
Oh, so he's in for it too. I'm clear.
There were a lot of comments on this one, and it went back and forth
I have no doubt.
to the point where
I feel
somebody
bad that I missed
commented,
it.
"Maybe we should ask an expert."
Oh, yeah, and now the experts, which we are supposed to be, are probably going to disagree on this one.
We might. But okay, so let's just cut to the chase, because
Okay.
we're already past the half
We're
hour
already
here.
halfway.
All right, so this is a sparrow. It's
It is a
mostly
sparrow.
hidden by vegetation and
It
by
is.
the lighting. What I see here is a lot of rufous in the wing panel, a lot of
Yes.
rufous in the tail. And again, the colors, it's hard to judge exactly what we're looking at from a photograph like this.
That's
But
true.
the bill shape and the way the crest is raised, the way those feathers on the top of the head are raised, kind of has me in the slim body and the kind of long. It leans me in one direction, and to fortify that, the sort of almost olivey, buffy tone to the mantle feathers. So that's the back feathers above the wings that we can see. That's also on the rump, and then kind of the buffy flavor to the little bit of flank that we can see. That all steers me in one direction.
Okay, wait. Can I say
Yeah,
something before we switch? If this was the only photo I saw, I would probably agree with you. But the second photo where you lighten it is where things get a little hairy for me.
Yeah, so this is
Saying,
the
just
same
putting that out
photo.
there.
This is the same photo lightened up. And it's compared
Chris
with
Ortega asked, does everyone agree on Melospiza? Yes, we agree on Melospiza.
yeah. So, I mean, again, we'll just get right down to our argument. I think this looks like a swamp sparrow to me, for all the reasons I stated, plus the big markings on the back that we can see, and all of it. So let's have at it.
Okay, so I think this looks like a song sparrow to me. I think the pattern in the face just looks more song sparrowy to me. I think that the grayish eyebrow, I don't know, it just doesn't feel dark enough to be a swamp sparrow. And I say that knowing that acknowledging that the wings and the tail do look very rich. I think that the photo is overexposed and we're getting colors that aren't exactly there.
That could be. Like I said, a photograph. We've always said, we continue to say,
Photographs
one
are
photograph
hard.
like this is very, very difficult. The thing that I can't get past though is the bill shape. And so we have a song sparrow in front. That was also taken in New Hampshire in August, and
Nice pull.
it just the structure of this bird, like I said, it just yells swamp sparrow to me, and I'm bolstered by the bright colors of the wing and tail, and the general kind of olivish tones that I see. However, if there was another photograph of this bird that proved it to be a song sparrow, I'd be like, there you go.
And I would say the same thing. If there was another photo of this bird that definitely looked more swamp sparrowy to me, I would have no issue going back in that. And those are two species that can be quite difficult, especially in late summer where they're getting really worn and the feathers are looking kind of rough and the bird itself is very ragged.
Yeah.
Especially, those patterns that we rely on this time of year can really get muddy by wear, by molt in various stages. It can be quite difficult to identify those birds. And some of the clues that I use instead of those feather patterns, things like structure, things like habitat, things like voice, are completely unavailable to me here because of the way the bird is oriented and the fact that it's a photo and not a bird in the field. So, there you go. There you go.
There you go. I mean, yeah, we're not. I don't think.
We have people going both ways in the comments.
Oh, yeah.
So clearly, this is a bird that has vexed.
Alan says
us.
it looks like an ant shrike pattern.
Fair enough.
There we
Fair
go.
enough. There it is.
Okay.
Mediate first. Fasciated ant shrike female.
So yeah, so Nate feels that this looks like a song sparrow to him. I think this looks like a swamp sparrow to me, and that's pretty much where we're gonna have to leave it because there just isn't any more information for us.
There's no information
to go
There's
beyond that.
Melos Spiza spa, I guess,
and that's an important lesson to learn in birding. Is that there will be some birds that even if you get good looks at them in the field, you're going to walk away not knowing exactly what they are. And
you won't know what it is, or you'll get
that's
it wrong
fine.
or whatever.
That's fine.
That's the way it is.
But yeah, this one.
This one.
This one comes to us from Louisiana.
This one's more clear. I think we
is
can
two
identify
different
this
birds.
one, Greg.
This is
two different birds, but they're the same species.
They are. They were circling together near Covington, Louisiana, and so what do you see?
Great time of year to see them circling together. So I'm seeing a raptor. I'm seeing, there are a lot of birds out there that have long pointed wings that are not raptors. Things like swallows, things like swifts. The wing is too long, the wrist is too far away from the body to be a swift. Just don't get a swallow impression. The head is too small compared to the body. Swallows are very big-headed and chunky when you see them flying. So this is a raptor. Falcon is definitely in play, and kite is definitely in play because we're talking about birds that have long wings. Covington, Louisiana. Not too many falcons. I think the falcon that would be most likely would probably be American kestrel. A lot of things don't seem right to me for American kestrel. American kestrel is super skinny in the body.
It is, and the wings are too long.
Head. The wings are too long. Yeah, I agree with you.
There's too much secondary in there. Kestrels. I think of kestrels as you said, slim and compact. But in the summer they're both dragonfly hunters, and you see them up doing that.
Exactly right.
This bird is, as I just sort of alluded to without actually giving more information, is a dragonfly hunter in the summer.
A specialist.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but the bird on the right, we got two shots of it, and so earlier we were talking about molt with the white-rumped sandpiper, and this is interesting here because what we have
Nice molt
is
here.
we have a fresh juvenile on the left, and we have two pictures of an adult of the same species on the right, and the bird on the right is going through some heavy molt.
Yeah, well, it just finished breeding. It finished putting
Yep.
out that juvenile. So birds go through 3 or 4 major life events every single year, and they can't do 2 of those life events at the same time for the most part. And those life events are
Right.
breeding, which takes all the energy, molt, which takes an enormous amount of energy, and migration. So typically birds are not doing any 2 of those things at the same time. So as soon as adult birds finish breeding, they immediately transition to molt, which is why
Yep.
in late summer you see so many molty birds out there because they have finished putting the chicks out. The chicks are finally on their own, and now they can have some time for themselves, and they can replace those wing feathers and let them do their molt. Tim E. Panini, whose also name is also Nate, says, "Why did I think molt that they could no longer fly?" That's true in some species. Species
Ducks.
like waterfowl and grebes will go someplace to do what's called a molt migration. They'll finish up breeding and then they'll travel off to some different spot, usually some large
Yep.
body of water that they can sit in the middle of and be safe. And they will molt all of their wing feathers at once. That's not the case with raptors. They need to fly to eat, so they
Yep.
can't go through a flightless period. So they sequentially molt their wing feathers. You can see that it's molting. They usually go inside out. Is that correct, Greg?
Yeah, so they're molting. This one's molting the inner primaries first,
Yeah, and that's
which
gonna
are missing.
slowly replace
Um,
them. Yep, and the inner
and some-
tail feathers as well.
and the inner
tertials
tail
as well.
feathers, exactly. And on the primaries, we can see one field mark that will get us to the family at least, and that is the really short P10. So the first primary in that middle picture is so much shorter than the other primaries, and we can see that also in the bird on the left a little bit. It's suggested by the forward shape of the wing, and that's kind of unique to kites. And Susan Nelson and Lori Conrad on Facebook both suggest Mississippi kites, so we're going to cut to the chase. That is what these are.
That is correct.
And the reason I picked this is because it shows a field mark that's kind of overlooked, but if you can see it, it's slam dunk for Mississippi kite. But it's subjective and needs to be used with caution. And that is the way that the tail flares. So you look
we
in
do a
all
little bit
three
of
of these pictures, the outer shape of the outer edge of the tail has this kind of curved flare to it. And that is Mississippi kite. And again, if you can see it, and as you can in these birds, it's pretty obvious. That
yeah,
tail
great
shape.
time of year. Yeah, it's a great time of year to enjoy Mississippi kites. They are banding together to prepare to migrate. They are long distance migrants. So they breed across much of the Southeast, even north up into the Great Lakes region, increasingly in New England. But they band together in these massive flocks in late summer, and they're taking advantage of the late summer boom of locusts and dragonflies and all the flying insects that they like to eat, building up those fat reserves, and they're going to head on south around the Gulf of Mexico, all the way down to Central America into South America, into the Amazon basin, where they spend the winter. It's a long migration, and so they're getting started early. And you can go to hot spots, little pinch points on the North American continent, in Mexico, and especially in Panama, where you can just see thousands upon thousands upon thousands of Mississippi kites passing by every single day in these massive big flocks. It's a really cool experience. But in the Southeast, one of the things you can do is find a field that's been recently hayed, where the insects are up and moving around, and you can frequently find large groups of Mississippi kites and swallowtail kites as well. And it's a cool experience.
August and early September is also a really good time, as it is with so many southern breeding birds, for post-breeding wanderers. And, the best time to see Mississippi kite out of range in the north is in August and September. And they will often be seen at hawk watches, turning back around and heading south as the hawk watches gear up in September.
Yeah, they'll go as far north as the bugs are, and then they'll stop where the bugs stop.
Absolutely. This one comes from Idaho.
This
And
is a cool photo.
this is a cool photo.
Yeah.
There's so much going on here.
There's a
Um,
lot. There's a lot going on in this photo, that's
and
for sure.
and it's again, this is, this is end of summer, or getting towards the end of summer. We talk a lot about molt, and boy, is this bird molting.
This bird is in Molt City right now. You can see this is a raptor. I get a very raptory vibe from this. I'm not sure if I can really explain exactly why, but it's
going by
kind of
feel.
tubular. It's tubular. It's got really long, kind of broad wings. It's got a relatively large head. And let's see what's going on here. It's gray. It's brown. It's got stripes in its tail. It's losing half its tail feathers. This is a motley bird.
It is a motley bird, but it's kind of hefty. It's got a little heft to
Donkey.
it.
Yeah.
The first thing we can see that sticks out to me is those two tail feathers coming in at the left side of center. Those are adult tail feathers, and the other tail feathers are young bird and immature. And then there's also there's two other tail feathers coming in, kind of sticking out the sides.
Sticking out the side. Yeah.
But those two long gray tail feathers with the dark slate and light slate with white, broad kind of white tip on the tail feather really kind of nails it as one of two species, and that's Cooper's or sharp-shinned hawk. And I think on a goshawk, a goshawk would be heavier. And the tail pattern, we would see that it's sharp enough that we would see the unique tail pattern, especially on those very fresh tail feathers coming in. The goshawk has a sort of a light band at the top of the dark band that separates the two shades of gray, and it's subtle, but it's distinct.
That would be American goshawk now, not
the
not
American goshawk. Yes. The other thing we can see that kind of nails it as Cooper's hawk is it's got a dark cap.
Yep, and especially the pale nape as well to differentiate the dark cap. Yeah,
precisely. Yes.
Yeah.
It has a dark cap. The dark cap does not blend into the back.
Correct. Yeah, as it would on a Sharpie. I also get kind of a overall kind of very hefty, long-winged impression of this bird, which is more of a Cooper's hawk thing. Sharper-shinned hawk, it's more compact from front to back than a Cooper's hawk, and has a little bit of shorter wings. And again, these are not
like you said.
These are not really quantitative things. There's more kind of going by feel, which is sort of what it comes to with these two species a lot of time. But that's what I see. Definitely. When I first saw this photo, Cooper's hawk was the first thing. Yeah, Cooper's hawk was the first thing I thought, and maybe goshawk. I got thinking a little bit goshawk, so I'm glad you ruled that one out. Given that we are in Cub River, Idaho, and I would expect all three accipiters to be possible there.
Yeah, and I think goshawk also has, and again, it's really hard to tell anything about wing shape from this angle. But goshawk also it has kind of longer, broader wings than Sharpshin has the shortest wings. Cooper's in the middle, and when you see a goshawk flying past a hawkwatch or over a hawkwatch, you're actually more likely to confuse it with red-shouldered hawk than you are Cooper's hawk.
Exactly.
It's just a different bird. All right, so this is a Cooper's hawk that is undergoing molt. The brownish feathers are immature, and the blue-gray kind of slate-colored feathers are adult feathers coming in. But you can see all.
Nora Bird on YouTube asks, "Is this 3 generations of flight feathers?" And it's quite possibly.
It is possible.
Be.
Yeah.
It takes a long time for raptors to replace their flight feathers. Famously, turkey vulture, it takes like 2 years. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some really complicated things going on there that someone that's more into hawk molt than me could probably parse out. But it would not shock me if there's multiple generations, more than just 2 generations of flight feathers on this bird.
Elise May on Facebook says, the way you both choose birds to identify from unusual angles make this class very valuable and informative. Thank you. Thank you. We do.
Well, that's a shout out to the people taking poor photos of birds.
Yes.
We're here for you. We feel you.
We are here for you.
The most useful photos of birds are frequently not the best birds, not the best photos of birds.
Yeah.
Speaking
of, from Sequoia National Park in California. Again, cutting to the chase here. We can see this is a pretty small bird because of the branch size it's sitting on. It has a small, thin, blackish bill we can see.
Yep.
Overall, it's just kind of dull colored.
Spots in the tail.
The spots
it's
on the tail.
It's warbling.
The spots on the tail are what kind of get us to family very quickly, because it's the wood warblers that have tail patterns like this. And so now we have to figure which warbler this is. What do you see in
kind of streaky and brown? It's chunky for a warbler.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I think it's a kind of a bigger bodied warbler. Some warblers look kind of small and large headed, but this one is the opposite. Not much pattern in the face. Might be a little bit of an eye ring, though that's kind of hard to determine here.
Yeah.
But I do like the kind of creamy yellow throat on this bird. That's actually happening there. That's not a photo artifact.
And there aren't a lot of warblers that summer in the Sierra Nevada. So that really it's not like going to northern Michigan, say, where or Minnesota, where you might have a dozen to choose from. I think you've got like 3 or 4.
Yep.
But again, we're going to cut to the chase on this one. Sibley again does a wonderful job of a wonderful job of telling us what bird this is. First off, by the tail pattern. We go by range and tail pattern, and we quickly get to yellow-rumped warbler, the Audubon's subspecies.
Western subspecies of yellow-rumped warbler, formerly considered its own species, called Audubon's warbler. If you've got an old field guide, it might still have Audubon's and myrtle warblers. Solomon TV says orange-crowned warbler. That is one of the birds that you would expect would be a possibility in Sierra Nevada. Or Sequoia,
but it doesn't have that tail
Sierra
pattern.
Nevadas. Doesn't have the tail pattern, and it would be. It doesn't really have a white undertail either. Orange-crowned warbler is very much kind of the same color all the way from the bottom of the throat, all the way across the bottom of the bird to the rump. You can clearly, or the undertail, you can clearly see that this bird has some gradients here: yellow underneath the throat, kind of browny, streaky in the breast, and white under the belly and under the tail, which makes it Audubon's yellow-rumped.
And what we were talking about earlier about juvenile plumages, you'll notice Sibley illustrates the juvenile plumage there and just how different it looks from the first winter plumage above it. And as he says, the first they molt out of this within the first few days of leaving the nest. So you really have like a week to see this plumage. And this bird in the photograph bred nearby and is retaining juvenile plumage on the belly. And starting to get it's got adult tail feathers, or first year tail feathers.
Usually
I should
the first
say.
Things that they
Flight feather, exactly. And the face is starting to get that that kind of open with eye arcs and that pale creamy throat that Nate mentioned. So I mean, if you look at just the head, I think you could, especially if you're a Western birder, you have no problem identifying this as a yellow-rumped warbler. But then
probably see enough of them.
The fine streaks underneath, yes, if you see enough of them. The fine streaks underneath might throw you, and that's because the juvenile plumage, which, again, we only see for like a week. And this person was lucky enough to see it.
There you go.
And our last bird
this is
of
our
the day.
last one. Yeah, all right. Big old chunky bill. Greg.
Oh, yeah.
This is not a warbler.
Not a warbler.
A lot of streaks all over.
It's a
little
song
bit of
sparrow.
Face pattern here. It's sort of interesting. It's a swamp, actually, Greg. It's a little bit of a cool face pattern here. That kind of mustache, that white mustache, and looks like it's got a lot of white around the eye as well.
It's got a big white arc under the eye.
Yeah, for sure. Love that tail pattern. Look at that. Look
Bingo.
at all those white on the edges of the tail. That's got to mean something.
Bingo. There's the field mark that identifies this bird, along with everything else that Nate mentioned. But really, to seal the deal, that tail pattern is unique among our sparrows, or at least kind of unique among our sparrows.
Yeah.
I think there
Well,
might
it's
be one
only
other.
kind of a sparrow. So it's a weird one. It's a weirdo
Yeah.
all by itself.
So you know, the other birds that have tail pattern kind of like this might be Lark bunting, which also has a lot of pattern going on the face in female and young plumage. But that species would have more white in the wing. I think the tail would appear shorter, the bill would appear
Yes,
heavier.
exactly. Yeah, I think that the bird itself would just feel more compact.
Yes.
Generally, this is kind of a lankier, longer limbed, long
Lark
tail,
bunting
long legs
feels like a
kind of bird.
grosbeak to me. It feels like
Yeah,
a blue
it's real
grosbeak.
chunky. Yeah.
Yeah, this bird is slimmer and but you can see the face pattern. It has the adult face pattern. It's there. You can see the pattern. We can also see how
Yeah.
young this bird is by the little stray bits of fluff still clinging to it on the back and
Yeah, especially around
maybe
the head,
on the
yeah.
back of the head. So this is a young bird, and it's also got that yellow fleshy gape. But the tail pattern, as Nate pointed out, nails it as a lark sparrow.
Lark sparrow. Love a bird named after another bird. Lark sparrow is I expect to be a common breeder in Commerce City in the foothills. Yeah, it's cool looking sparrow, big sparrow, kind of like halfway between a towhee and the Melospisa, like song sparrows. And very distinctly patterned. It's one of the, if you can get a good look at the face, you're not going to mistake too much. But these young birds, all the patterns around the head
Well,
tend to be a little muddy.
They do, and I am happy to live in an area where we have breeding lark sparrows, at least nearby, and I've seen them very young, like recently fledged, and the face pattern is really obscured by that juvenile streaking, and it takes a while to wear off. Again, it can take a week or two for that to kind of wear away, to get to the point where we are here, where we can make out the adult.
Sort of see it, yeah.
We can make out the adult plumage, even though it's kind of not complete and kind of obscured. So yes, this is
even the tail looks. I mean, the tail pattern is obviously screams lark sparrow, but tail feels a little bit short, and it could be because this is a young bird relatively soon out of the nest. Lark sparrow kind of famously has a very long tail for a sparrow.
Yes, and they're very flamboyant with their tails. As they bounce around, they constantly flipping those white outer tail feathers with and the tail feathers with the broad white tips. They're flipping that open.
Yeah, it's a cool bird.
It is a
go
cool
on
bird.
at length about lark sparrows. They have weird breeding tendencies. Like they are just like these weird patches in random places all over. In Ohio at the Biggest Week, they're at Oak Openings, which is down south. This kind of this savanna, dry, sandy savanna sort of habitat, and they do that here in where I live in North Carolina too. Like it's not a bird that you would think breeds in North Carolina, but yet you find them in the sandhills and like the bombing ranges at Fort Bragg, the places where they kind of burns off. Where it's kind of sandy and scraggly pines, and that's the sort of place they'll find that wherever it is. It's
Sand
cool.
Prairie is where we find them in Illinois and Indiana.
Yeah.
And you literally have to go to the Kankakee River, the Illinois River, the Mississippi River, and the sand prairies in between is where you find lark sparrows, and they're
really
very
disparate
habitat
in the east.
specific.
Much more common in the West, as Galen Allvine points out. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Good one. Good
so
bird.
that's it for us as far as
we
birds.
came up against it.
And we're right up against the hour, so I think we did this one. I mean, after being a little bit rusty for taking a few weeks off,
got
here,
it,
I think
Greg.
we got it. We did it.
Before we go,
Yes.
if anyone has any questions, please, this is the time to do it. But before we get to them, we do want to do the pointing
thing.
up to, if you enjoy these sorts of programming, please consider supporting them through membership in the American Birding Association. You can get where Greg is pointing there, aba.org/join. The American Birding Association membership is extremely affordable. It's a cup of coffee a month. please consider supporting us through membership. We're doing a lot of cool stuff. You can also find out if we're doing another one of these, probably in another couple weeks. Go to the ABA website. You don't have to be a member to sign up to our newsletter, our weekly newsletter. We will give you a heads up when we're planning on doing the next one.
To sign up for the newsletter, go to any page on our website down to the bottom, the footer of any page, and there is a link to sign up for our newsletters. We not only have flight calls, but we have a travel newsletter, and a couple of other newsletters that you can sign up for and keep up to speed with everything that we're doing.
Absolutely. We are doing a lot of cool stuff. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Please jump back into What's This Bird and help people identify birds. Give your thoughts on that weird sparrow. We will see you in a couple weeks, and keep bird.
Bird.
You need a better sign off. That's all I got. Keep bird.
Keep bird.
Need some music. Yeah.
Yeah, that's